Hello and welcome to Cheshire Audio. Now I've just pressed play on the camera and changed my mind about what I'm going to do, which is kind of classic really. This was going to be a video showing how to set up a pair of speakers. Thinking about it, there's a lot more involved. When you set up a pair of speakers, there's an awful lot of things you have to sort of understand about room acoustics, about speaker design, about what they require. Yeah, there's quite a lot more involved in it really, so I thought I've sort of, on spur of the moment, decided to perhaps talk about the two rooms we've got at the shop here. And I actually bought this shop because of the two demonstration rooms, thinking they were absolutely perfect for hi-fi. And actually, when I connected up the first systems in them, they were both terrible. And we've got around that, but it's quite a learning process. I mean, I always feel as though I'm actually quite good on room acoustics and quite good at judging rooms and how they're going to perform, but I actually totally got these wrong. Totally got them wrong. So I'm going to talk you through what we did to improve things. Might help with problems that you've got with your own setup. The biggest difference in a hi-fi is the room. It really is. It's sort of the best hi-fi system can sound the worst, and the poorest hi-fi system can sound the best, just down to the acoustic of a room. Really, I've heard quite mundane little systems sounding great, and I've heard big active name systems which should be fabulous sounding terrible, and it's all been down to rooms. Unfortunately, the better your system gets, the more susceptible they are to room acoustics, because if you're producing a deeper bass and more extended bass, it tends to set the rooms off more. So you have to learn how to control that, and there's a few sort of tricks and tips and that sort of thing that you can try and sort things out. So let's have a look at the room and see where to go from here. Hopefully this view isn't too disturbing. It's not making my nose look big. I'm using the wide angle just to get more of the room in really. So if it's a bit of an odd view, then sorry about that. Okay, right. Let's. I'll switch around and we'll have a look at the room. Okay, so this is our sort of big den room. You'll have seen it before in videos. This is the main room we use. Partly chose this because it's a quite a good size. It's about, I don't know, 18, 19 feet in length. Something like 12, 13 feet wide. I think 12 feet wide. I think it is. So it's a sort of rectangular shape. The worst room for hi-fi generally is if some of these older this is an older Victorian building, but quite often in old Victorian buildings you'll have a front room which is usually the spare room that nobody uses and ends up with a hi-fi in it. Classic scenario is they'll be 11 feet wide by 11 feet long with an 8-foot high ceiling, well usually more than that in the old Victorian places, and that is kind of the worst shape, because what tends to happen is, particularly the bass side, you'll find that the sound comes out of the speakers, hits all the walls at the same time, comes back to the seating position, cancels everything out, and you'll end up with a lovely sort of dynamic full sound when you're out of the room, but walk into the room and it all disappears, and unless you stand in the corners of the room, because that's the one place that the cancellation doesn't affect things. So it's quite a difficult thing to get around. We had a similar thing in here, and what I've actually ended up doing, I mean, it's generally what people will always do if they've got a room, if they're lucky enough to have a room that's dedicated to hi-fi, they will strip all the furniture out of it, just put a chair and a hi-fi system and a pair of speakers, and expect it to sound brilliant. And it's kind of the worst thing you can do, because you sort of do need a fair bit of damping. We've got minimal furniture in here. I mean, there's a few bits and bobs of things. There's a little hi-fi table over there, there's a coffee table, there's a little IKEA table there with a 80s planer 3 ready to be refurbed. Sort of quite soft sofa. You'll notice on the wall, the two sort of very beige looking panels, that's part of the story, because when I actually put the first system on here, there was very little bass, and if you turned things up, it went really, really shouty. You couldn't use any volume at all. It literally hurt your ears. It was horrific. And what I realised is there was an awful lot of sort of the sound bouncing around the room and a lot of cancellation going on. So what these panels are doing is just breaking up reflections on the rear wall. What they are, I made these ourselves really. These are a wooden frame, with it's exactly the same size as a panel of rock wool. So I bought some panels of rock wool, made a frame, put some battens across, and put some material over. I mean, you could sort of, I've seen them sort of done in red and done in brighter colours, but as a child of the 70s, I'm quite partial to beige, so we did beige. So people don't notice they're there. So you can actually fit things like that onto a wall, and they're not as noticeable as you'd imagine, really. So we've got 3 panels on there just to damp that. On the left-hand side, I mean, this room, partly thought this room was going to be ideal because it's not quite regular, and you don't really want a regular, like I said about the sort of 11 by 11 rooms, are very susceptible to reflection and cancellation of bass and all that sort of thing. This isn't quite regular. If you notice on the this left-hand side, there's actually a bookcase. On the right-hand side, it's a slightly bigger alcove on that side. So we've got a panel in there to damp that side, and on this side, I've filled it full of CDs, records, books, and just played with the amounts in there. Funnily enough, got very OCD about the whole thing, and sort of move things around and listen to it until it balanced. So now we've actually got to the situation where that speaker's actually quite close in. That speaker's got space behind it, but the way we've actually rearranged the books and everything, they react kind of the same. You get a very even response from the 2 speakers. So it's just on here. I've just put a few bits of their CD collections and some records. Even brought me a collection of Murakami books in, just because I had a space on the shelf, so I put my Murakami books on. If you've never read, let's go off on a tangent. Murakami, very very surreal writer. I mean, they're all translated for the Japanese. He's a big name in Japan. Very surreal stories, but I thought these were appropriate because he's very into hi-fi and he's very into his music. So a lot of his books, there's an awful lot of talk about hi-fi systems in it, and what music he's into. And he used to run a jazz club. So it's quite, if you're into hi-fi and you don't mind a bit of a surreal story, then try out Murakami. He's brilliant, and his books damp hi-fi rooms very very well. I'll give it. He's probably, if he ever watches it, he's probably quite impressed. So just a few pictures on. I've got John on the wall there. Even played around with the position of that a little bit because you sort of want to damp. You sort of want to damp the front wall, the back wall. You don't really want to damp too much the side walls because if you need a certain amount of reflection. So the position of John there is kind of across from the hole where the door is, and it seemed as though when he was in that position, it just had the right balance. So we've got that wall's quite reflective. We've got windows on this side are reflective. What tends to happen if you damp too much? I mean, I actually went to a manufacturer's demonstration room, who I won't name. He makes brilliant products, but he created a demonstration room showing all the damping products that he did and put everything in there. It's possibly the worst room I've ever been into. It was actually a bit of a disturbing experience. Actually, you walked in there and it just felt there was no reflection. When you spoke, your voice didn't seem to actually go anywhere out of your mouth. It was really strange. And he had a really high-end hi-fi system in there, and it just sounded like a medium-wave radio. So that's what happens if you overdamp. You need a certain amount of reflection, but you kind of want to control where it's going. You don't want it to sort of meet itself coming back. You want those reflections to create a big airy sound, so you're getting nice big broad image and everything. What you don't want is the bass cancelling out. I mean, you can't. Our little panels here. I mean, this is that's just for sort of mid-band reflection and things like that. And they cured the problems that we were having totally. Just in one go, it cured it. If you've got real problems with bass, you can put things in the corners of the room. I've got a bit of a little dragon tree in there, which actually makes everything makes a difference. The little dragon tree there, just because that was a more open corner, that helped things a little bit. But you can buy what they call bass traps, which are sort of quarter circle towers that sit into the corners, and they're quite effective. But I didn't want to. I'm trying to create a room that's not too far away from somebody's front room, really. If we go through to the little room, this is our little demonstration room. When I painted this, I didn't realise quite how orange it was going to be. So, but yeah, same situation. This room's sort of just off square. I was a little bit worried that this might be a bit too regular, but actually, when you look at it, the chimney stack, the chimney's off centre, the window's off centre. None of the walls are actually straight. This is quite an old building. None of the walls are straight, and it was quite good actually. I was hoping to actually listen this way, but this way around, really, you were too close, and there was a few issues with reflection. So we've run it this way, and the speakers. If you move the speakers out so that they're not firing into that corner of the fireplace there, you make sure they're actually angling more inwards. It sounds great in here actually. It's probably the best of the two rooms. Strangely, when I put all the panels in, so we've got 3 panels in this room. There's one less wall, which seem to need to be down that end and across from that one, and then this little alcove here was causing issues with the reflection. So we put one in there. Even after I'd done all that, and even put my album art on the wall there, bit of Bloodwind Pig, Mop the Hoople. Andreas Vollenbinder, who is reflecting a little bit. That's a bit of a classic hi-fi album, but I actually sort of kind of discovered him before it became a sort of classic, it became a sort of a demonstrator favourite really. He, she, yeah, that's a bit of, yeah. Where was I? Yes, yeah. It was still had a really odd ring to it. This room, even after all the panels had gone, it was like a high frequency ping. When you clapped your hands, the top end of the clap sort of fluttered around the room. It was quite strange, and then I sort of realised completely sort of off on a usual tangent. Thought, well, I haven't really finished this room. I haven't put a lampshade in, so I put a lampshade on the light because it was just a bare bulb in here, and it cured it totally. It was all rattling around up here, this sort of high frequency stuff, probably above the level of where the panels are, and there's no coving in here. Actually, coving is a great thing in a room. If you can cove the edges, that helps quite a bit. But there's no coving here, so it's squared off. Lampshade cured it. So yeah, top tip. Lampshades. So yeah, so that's the rooms. Nice lateral stand there. Made local to us in sort of Ashbourne. He's a clever guy actually. Kevin, who makes the lateral tables. I'm going off subject, aren't I? Okay, so that's the 2 rooms. That's what we've done to them. The other issue we've got this in the big room we've had is there's still a little bit of an issue with the bass. So the actual position of the settee, we had it further forward and slowly moved it back, and there's a sweet spot in this room where if you sit correctly in the chair, it's perfect. If you sort of sit forward, the bass reduces. So I have to get very strict with the customer. Sort of sit back in your chair. Stop slouching forward. So yeah, there's still quirks in here. So but yeah, the chair. If you just sit properly in the chair, then it's perfect. But it will move back slightly further. But if you go any further back than that, it starts to get a little bit too much. So yeah, that's the rooms. Part 2 of this will be just setting up the speakers. So I just thought I'd show around and show what we've done. The other issue we did have in here is that the floor is very, very bouncy. Probably at some point I'll take everything up and reinforce the floor a little bit. So at the moment, what I tend to use, Townsend make these little stands, which you can see that the speaker actually rocks around on it, which is completely counterintuitive when you think about. Generally, you want to have speakers as rigid as possible. If you go completely the other direction, and sort of make them rather than being absolutely rigid, make them so they actually resonate, but resonate within a frequency that's sort of outside the audio band. So they moved about 3 Hertz. And what that does is isolates them from the floor. It stops the energy from the speaker going into the floor and being lost. Because what we were finding was it was sounding great downstairs, but came in here and the bass was really strange. But we're using these has cured that quite a bit really, and the mid-range flutter that we were getting has been cured by the panels. So yeah, at the moment we're using it. It makes setting up a bit difficult, which is why I tend to just leave this pair of fine audios in here, really, because they're set up perfectly. And if anybody wants to hear anything, we just tend to use these with amp, turntable, whatever. Obviously, if they want to hear different speakers, we'll change the speakers. But the fines, just they're quite easy to position. So because these have we'll get into this in the next video actually. In speaker designs, these have a sort of a omnidirectional port. They don't port out the back. They have the little grill at the bottom, which you can see on those. That's where the downward firing port exits, and it's all the way around. So they're actually quite easy to position these. They don't need too much fiddling with. So. Right, so I think that's it for today. But I'll next video is going to be probably talk a bit about speaker designs and how they react in rooms, and then show how I position speakers. It isn't the same way as everybody positions speakers, but just getting them right makes a big difference as to how your system performs. So we'll talk through that. There's no real proper definitive rules about speaker positioning, really. Even manufacturers' own sort of suggestions, you have to sort of just go with what the room's telling you to do, really. The speakers that are supposed to be against a wall quite often need to be away from a wall in certain rooms. That old Lynn Cans, years ago, I used to manage a Lynn dealership. Quite often with Lynn cams, which are supposed to be as close to a wall as possible, some rooms they had to be 2 or 3 feet out. It was really dependent on what you're driving them with and what the room was like. So yeah, that's the next video. So I hope you've enjoyed. We enjoyed this one. A bit different to usual. I'm going to turn you around. Yeah, a bit different to usual, but just thought it's a bit of sort of an interesting one, really. Right. Okay. So. I hope this has been useful. If you've got any questions, just send us an email, give us a ring. You can leave comments below. It's quite difficult to keep up with the comments, so sometimes if you just give us a call, really. I'll put the phone number at the end. Yeah, if if you enjoyed the video, just leave us a like, or if you could subscribe, that's brilliant, because it just gets us more out there. Yeah, okay, I'll leave it at that, and hopefully in the next couple of days I should be able to do part 2. Thank you very much.